Cleopatra. Well, that's the Hollywood version. You notice her braids. You ask her, why did they braid her hair? Because the real Cleopatra had what kind of hair? African hair, clearly. But you know, Cleopatra was seen as being mixed also, just to be clear. She was like the Halle Berry of her time, maybe. I don't know, kind of mixed. But still African, that's the point. So what is this religious mythology we're talking about? And what does it mean? Why is it such a radical idea? Well, we can even look, if you don't believe in Kaleikoa, you can read books like Black Athena, which are also important in arguing even Greece. When you talk about Greece, see, Greece is kind of seen as Europeans as like the fatherland. This is like the foundation of European philosophers and European ideals and democracy, Plato and Socrates and so forth. But even the Greeks themselves, where did the Greeks get this knowledge? Well, all you gotta do is look at a map. Look at the map and look, where is Greece? And right across the Mediterranean is what? Egypt. Still don't believe me? Well, this book might change your mind, but one will. Let's look at Herodotus. Herodotus, the father of history. One of the greats of Greek historians, the father of history. Well, what does he say? And look when he lived. He lived only 480 years BC. Way after the so-called Egyptians. And he says, the people of Colchis must be Egyptians because like them, they are black-skinned and woolly haired. Their own historians are telling them that Egyptians were black. The uniform voice of primitive antiquity spoke of the Ethiopians as one single race, dwelling along the shores of the southern ocean, from India to the Pillars of Hercules. What is the Pillars of Hercules? Spiritual development. I want you to talk about it. This is what Herodotus said. From India to the Pillars of Hercules. Okay, cool. Oh, we can look at Aristotle. Egyptians and Ethiopians were very black. That's his own language. Father of medicine, Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath. Yeah, and they say he is the father of medicine, 460 BCE. Next one. Oh, no, not really. Imhotep, in fact, was considered father of medicine. 2650 BCE. 2,000 years. 2,000 years before him. He was, in fact, known as the first one to study the effects of different kind of medicines and treating the body and so forth. But see, we get sold the idea that the Greeks began much of this knowledge, when in fact, the Greeks only borrowed, again, from the Africans. Well, let's look at Hegel, the great German philosopher, probably one of the brilliant minds of his time. How did he see Africa? See, this kind of answers the question. And as he says, Hegel says, at this point we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Africa is the unhistorical, underdeveloped spirit still involved in the conditions of mere nature. But you can see, even by the time where Hegel comes about in Europe, he looked at places like Africa void of any kind of humanity. Yet, that was not the truth at all. Now we're talking about Adam and Eve. So I asked you guys earlier, who are these? And you guys said Adam and Eve. Well, this is what Newsweek is saying. Now why would I make this point? Well, let's look at the Last Supper also. This is Da Vinci. When did he paint this? In the 1500s. How many years after supposedly this event occurred? 1500 years later. We are closer to them today than they were to the event. This is not a Polaroid snapshot shot of what exactly occurred. This is a European painting a picture with European faces of an event that happened 1500 years before him. And yet the confusion, people look at this as somehow it's some kind of holy image, as if there's some kind of truth in this image. Now, I'm not saying the story is not true, My point to argue, of course, there's no way you're going to tell me that's what they look like, knowing the facts that I understand. And there's a reason why this image affects many of us today. Well, who it is? Who's this over here? Kind of like Bob Marley, this one, yeah? As I understand, this is one of the most earliest images painted of Jesus in the 2nd century. 1,300 years before Da Vinci. I wonder which one knew more of the truth. The one that was closer to the event, found in that area, or the one 1,500 years later they didn't invent, found further away. So even the images that control our mind, and you ask the question, so what? Why is it shocking? Why is it causes confusion and feeling funky about it? What has been programmed in our minds to make us think and accept particular things? See, I believe this. If the world understood this, I think so-called real Christians would look at the world in a very different way. If they realize that the so-called Lord that they pray to look this way, they might look at the world in a very different way, perhaps. Well, let's not stop there. You can go and look at the earliest images of Jesus and Mary. And the earlier you look, the darker they are. That's a fact. Not Kaleikoa is true. And you can even look at the ancient Egyptian stories of Horus. These are some of the most earliest images that you find of Jesus. In fact, this is one of the earliest paintings. This is what's known as the Black Madonna. Some of you might be known. If you went to the Vatican and you wonder, I wonder where does the Pope pray? This is the image that he prays to, that you find in the Vatican. It's not that the wood happened to be very dark and so they made it that way, whatever. So I want you guys to understand, this is part of understanding history. See, at one time, color wasn't really a big deal. Color became a big deal when slavery came around. Let's look at Africa and the history of people. Well, we know as the same science that Africans moved out. Yeah, but 100,000 years ago, we started to move as peoples and they migrated out. And Mendel's, what does Mendel's law basically say? Darker is dominant. Do we go from blonde-haired, blue-eyed Adam and Eve to black people? Or do we go from black people to blonde-haired, blue-eyed people? Meaning, we all descend physically from whom? African people. That's a scientific idea. Now, the only way you can pretend the science doesn't work is to say, I'm not going to look at the data, I'm going to create some other kind of idea, I'm going to make myself a painting and I'm going to believe what I see in this image of the painting. The point is, even science tells us this. As I said, we are all Africans. Mama Africa, as Bob Marley said. Okay. Even the pharaohs, they had to do x-rays and DNA. And they come up with the idea, this one. The analysis said, oh yeah, after all, they were African people. We were wrong. So the question of who does this benefit? Why do we continue and accept these lies? Why not tell the truth? Who does it hurt? Who does it empower? Who does it disempower? Well, let's not stop just with Moses. We can look at other religions. I can look at the Hindus. You remember at one time Ethiopians and Africans controlled all the way to India. These are some of the earliest forms of some of the Hindu gods. And they get some color also. Well, this is one of the earliest physical sculptures of the Buddha. Check out that here. Check out that eye. Even Buddhism has images that have changed and shifted through time. Other images of Buddha, as you can see, even check that out when he's here. And of course, Buddha, you know, he wasn't a Nazi back then, of course. This is an ancient symbol that was later taken by the Third Reich, and images were used. But because the reason why they stole those images, because these are very ancient images that had particular ideas from ancient times. Sorry, buddy. So we'll leave Africa. We're going to run quickly to this next one. Well, the next myth, who discovered America? For today, of course. And of course, Christopher Columbus did, right? 1492. That's what we're told. Well, of course not. We had American Indians and other natives, the Taino and Arawak and other people in the Caribbean for thousands of years prior to any coming of any Columbus. Columbus, of course, is important in that he begins Spanish colonization of those lands. He symbolizes conquest and genocide. He is the creator of what becomes the transatlantic slave trade. And he has killed millions, in fact, under his reign. If you can look, the estimates are, by 1496, look at these numbers. They came in 1492. Millions of people in that era had already been killed. Well, who's Christopher Columbus? What did they say? These are some of his own words. If your majesties do wish, all can be carried to Spain or made slaves on their island. And we get told he came with friendship and sailed the ocean blue and so forth. In 1498, he wrote that 4,000 slaves a year could be shipped to Spain. In fact, that's what they did. Or 6,000, I understand, just from his time were shipped to Spain for slaves. And this is an image. What do you see going on there? What's happening there? The dogs are eating the so-called natives, which is a common activity for the Spanish under Columbus. Well, thankfully we had Bartolome de las Casas who documented and explained some of that history. And you can see during Columbus's tenure as governor, hanging Tainos en masse. Hanging them, first of all. Then roasting them on spits or burning them at the stake. Hacking their children into pieces to be used as dog feed. To instill in the natives a proper attitude of respect toward the Spanish superiors. Now, these are not drawings that Kaleikoa did. These are actual drawings that the Spanish themselves did, documenting. Before they had the selfies and they were able to, document, they would draw those images. But if you take a look at it, you'll see people being maimed, hands being cut off, eyes being dug out, and ears being cut off. The kind of cruelty was performed by Columbus and the conquistadors was never seen beforehand in that part of the world. You can also see other examples. Crushed to earth by the horses, cut in pieces by swords, eaten and torn by dogs, many burned alive. And if you actually look at this, these are part of the most horrendous pictures that you'll find at that time also. And on top, of course, you see feeding babies to the man-eating dogs and hanging that little baby next to his mother. And of course, the common thing they favored, like, besides bashing babies onto rocks, was to physically burn them hanging alive. And in fact, they would burn and kill 13. 1 for the Savior, 12 for the disciples. Now just to remind us, this is all before ISIS was all around. That is Columbus. Holiday? He's just this great explorer. This is what we told. Of course, none of this is true at all. And yet this country still celebrates it as a core understanding of being an American. And I asked that question, how can that be? How can Columbus still hold that supposed prestigious position of somehow being a holiday for the United States, knowing these facts about Columbus? Well, let's not stop at Columbus. Let's move on to the Thanksgiving. We told the story, right? The Pilgrims, persecuted, religious persecution, leave Europe, head to the New World, Providence, for love of their God. They come upon the land, and of course the Thanksgiving feast story, God provides them. Well, how many of you guys know the true story of the pilgrims? They land, well, supposedly Plymouth Rock as the mythology goes. And they say that the first thing they do is that they kneel and they pray. And after they pray, they climb up this sand hill. And in this large sand dune hill, they find all these native graves. Hundreds, or if not thousands, of natives who had died 20 years before in mass epidemics when settlers actually tried to live there earlier. And the first thing that they did was to say, wow, we have such a great God. Look what He gave us, all these things to dig up and find. So the first thing they actually did was to dig up the graves and take all those trinkets that they could find. And grave rob was the first thing the so-called pilgrims did when they came to the Americas. And of course, then they set up their house to stay and live. Unfortunately, many of them never lived out in a so-called open before, in a cruel winter. And about half of the so-called pilgrims died that first winter from starvation. The other half didn't starve. But let's just be clear, they weren't eating pumpkin pie and corn and turkey during the winter. I wonder what they were eating to survive. They were eating each other. Funny, don't tell us that part of the Thanksgiving story. And fortunately for them, if you watch the Disney version, you get Squanto comes along and teaches them how to fish and farm and to prepare for the following winter, which they do. And they survive, and they have this great lifestyle that's developed. And it's the idea that they become friends. The Indians teach them how to survive, and they share, and they sit down, and they have Thanksgiving dinner. Well, that's not really the true Thanksgiving story. 20 years later, the so-called pilgrims, after being helped by the natives of that land, go to war with them. And we have things like the Mystic Massacre and later the Pequot Massacre, where they large attack upon them. And as you can see this picture here, they surround them and they virtually burn them out of their villages. Men, women, children, the old, the young. And as he says here, the inhabitants remaining were largely Pequot women and children and older men. Mason ordered that the enclosure be set on fire. Justifying his conduct later, Mason declared that the attack against the Pequot was an act of a God who laughed his enemies and the enemies of his people to scorn, making the Pequot as a fiery oven. Thus did the Lord judge among the heathen, filling with dead bodies. Mason insisted that any Pequot attempting to escape the flames should be killed. We'll go to the next, the Pequot Massacre. This is William Bradford. The original, I repeat, this is the original proclamation of Thanksgiving before it becomes a holiday. And he says in 1637, quote, "Those that scraped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others thrown with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was conceived that they thus destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see him thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the same. And horrible was the stink and the scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave their prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them. Thus they closed their enemies in their hands, and gave them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy." That's part of the first original Thanksgiving. So we think about Thanksgiving, we get the Hollywood version again of Thanksgiving. I mean, I like the day off. I don't think there's nothing wrong with giving Thanksgiving. But if we somehow believe that Thanksgiving has to do with some kind of image that we just saw previously, see, that's part of the cruelty of history. That perhaps if we really understand the kind of cruelty that were put upon the Pequot and Native brothers of those lands, perhaps we might have a little more humanity for their way of life today. Well, let's not stop there. Of course, we can talk about the Salem witch hunts. And the reason I talk about this is because this is the common one for Hawaiians. You know, Kaleikoa, you're lucky the missionaries came. You know, you women were oppressed under the kapu system. You know, they couldn't eat coconuts, couldn't eat pig. They were oppressed by their men. And of course, the answer is, not eating coconuts is one thing. I don't know about being burned at the stake. So I mean, the idea that some of our women were oppressed versus puritanical history of the United States, I mean, there's no comparison. We've never burnt the women at the stakes. This is part of the U.S. history, this hatefulness for women. This is something the United States is still trying to get over to this day. Sorry. Well, let's look at George Washington. People talk about Washington, of course. You should remember he was a slave owner himself. 317 slaves. He let one go when he died. He began, really, the policies of extermination of American Indians began under George Washington. What I mean by policies, he put that into effect, actual government policies. Not just of forcing to remove them, but the idea that they must exterminate American Indians. As he says here, lay waste all the settlements around, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. Well, let's not stop with, let's go to Thomas Jefferson, the supposed writer of the Declaration of Independence, the great pen. One of the wealthiest slave owners in Virginia, first of all. He freed 5 when he died. And as he says, quote, don't do it. Keep your slaves. Be a good master. And he's told that they teach us, in fact, that, man, he was one of the greatest Americans that ever lived. Well, let's not stop with slavery. We also know, as it says here, this is your own words, the Indian resistance must be met with the hatchet. Jefferson continued, and if ever we are constrained to lift the hatchet against any tribe, he wrote, we will never lay down till that tribe is exterminated or is driven beyond the Mississippi. In war, they will kill some of us. We shall destroy all of them. Pursue the Indians to extermination. To it. What does the word exterminate mean? Where have we heard that words before? Extermination and genocide.
Bugs and pests.
Huh? The Third Reich and Hitler. You know that bad Hitler. But let me just add, it is said under Thomas Jefferson and his policies, more natives were killed and exterminated than any other president. So we talk about Thomas Jefferson. I don't know why we don't tell the whole story. And of course, what is this picture about? His children, right? Of course, we all know he had children, one of his own slaves, Sally Hemings, who had children. And as the story goes, some of those children actually were later sold. But Sally Hemings, of course, you know, as the story also goes, he had a kind of thing for young black girls. That was his kink. That's Thomas Jefferson, the great American. And let's not, think that slavery was something light. The transatlantic slave trade, where you had millions, I'm not talking a few hundred, millions of Africans died just in the passage from Africa to the United States. Where you might have a cargo of human beings and half of them would die of the transfer, to be sold, to be whipped, to be killed. But there was resistance to slavery that we should also honor. One of the greatest minds ever, Frederick Douglass, great writer. Nat Turner. In fact, there's a movie about him today, Birth of a Nation. But Nat Turner is interesting. As a preacher, he's one of the few blacks who actually could read. And he said, God told him, kill your master. And he went off to kill the master. He got scared. One thing is to have slaves, but now you got slaves trying to kill the master. And he led rebellions. And in fact, this is an ancient picture, you can't really tell, but that's John Brown. Who's John Brown?
Abolitionist.
Abolitionist. So this is a white guy, just to be clear. This is John Brown. This is a white guy who he couldn't stand just asking to free the slaves. John Brown said, frick this, we're going to free the slaves. And he and his own family took the gun to help free the slaves. So my point is just this example. This is a white person that we should look at to honor and say, yeah, we had white people who gave the life, not of himself, but even his family members, to try to end the dehumanization process of slavery. I talked about this earlier, so I'm going to skip through all this. But again, the idea is to understand the Johnson-McIntosh case and how the United States creates the mythology of, again, these are Supreme Court judges, just to understand how the United States gains title and the idea of, just start with this one. So these are the three main cases. It's called the Marshall Trilogy. Really the cornerstones of how the United States claimed control of so-called American Indian land and the sovereignty over American Indians. First is the Johnson-McIntosh case, which basically says, using the doctrine of discovery, that says, man, America was discovered fair and square by Europeans, and by the fact that these natives were heathens and they were not Christians and barbarians, because of the papal bulls, they could therefore claim these lands as their own through what's called the doctrine of discovery. That the American Indians who were living there had no right of land ownership because they're not Christians. They only had rights of occupancy. In the second case of Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, in a short, is where it provides that the United States Congress shall have plenary power, meaning all these nations can say what they want and this and that, but the bottom line is Congress has power over them. We, in fact, have sovereign control over them. And the third piece, Worcester versus Georgia, has to really do with what's called the idea, the dependent nations idea, that the Indians, because they're savages and civilized, they don't know how to really rule themselves, and we as the white people have brought civilization to them, and they should be thankful that we know better, and therefore we are the trustees and there are awards. That's basically the idea. And therefore Indians are seen as dependent nations. Now sadly, these ideas are still to this day cornerstones of American Supreme Court jurisprudence. To this day, whenever they have cases that deal with American Indians, they still refer to these cases as precedents. I want you guys to think about that. The idea is that American Indians are heathens and savages and are barbarians and are actually less than, are still today part of the judiciary, part of the decision making. So we really talk about equality. We can see even from the foundations of American justice, American Indians will not get justice. Well, let's look at Lincoln. Just a few more. And we get told, what's the mythology about Lincoln? Free the slaves, right? That's what we get told. You know, equality is, well, not really. If you actually read Lincoln and know about his history, it doesn't work that way. As he says, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I will do it. See, the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. That's the story we get told. The Civil War was about keeping the Union intact. The question of slavery was one of the main questions. But his role in fighting the Civil War against the South wasn't to, I'm going to fight this war to protect us, to free the slaves. It was about protecting the Union. That's his own words.
The economic union, because the South, they wanted their own economic system.
And because of the system that they had running, the kind of cheap labor system. Not to say the North didn't have a cheap labor system at the same time. I will say then that I am not, so his own words now, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes. That's his own words. Unfortunately, or unfortunately I should say, when you talk about mass hangings, the largest mass hanging that occurred was of the Sioux Indians in 1862 by Lincoln, where 38 Indians, many of them in fact were innocent, were hung by Lincoln. by orders of Lincoln.
In Minnesota.
And this all comes to manifest destiny. This idea we talk about, and this is part of the ideas under the dream, this mentality. You can see this picture here. This idea of bringing civilization across the land, chasing the Indians the buffalo way, and they're bringing civilization with the locomotive and the telegraph and the Bible in one hand to bring civilization across. But this idea of the right of manifest destiny. And you got to think, what does the word mean, manifest destiny? This is all part of God's plan. Part of God's plan to say that, yeah, we're supposed to do whatever it takes, including mayhem and murder and plundering and pillaging, to take this great country and to create this country, to spread and possess the whole continent. See, of course, what happens when they stopped in California, they didn't stop in California. And hence, of course, Hawaii becomes part of. And these are just other examples of the photos, and you can see the pictures. That the idea that U.S. was a chosen land by God, conveying the idea of us a rightful destiny to take. Sorry. Let's just also just end with some of this. I'll go back to this one. And part of the history is to understand extermination policies isn't just a policy word. Extermination policy is actually a true event, and these are just a few of the massacres. And I used the word massacres, not engagement, massacres where you come in and you kill unarmed people by the dozens, by the hundreds, from Sand Creek all the way even into 1890, look in 1890, at Wounded Knee, where natives were massacred and killed for their lands, killed because they were seen as savages and less than human beings. See, my thing is that manifest destiny still lives to this day. We may not see murder in that same sense, but extermination is still going on. We can look at the Trail of Tears and understand that horrific history. We can look at the idea of, this land is your land, this land is my land. This idea somehow justifies the murder and torture and destruction of these civilizations. And just to show you, as much as 100 million perhaps were killed. It's not Kaleikoa saying this. This is a professor that's saying this. Put that into context in history and some of the worst mass murders and cases. When you put the American Indian in context, it's probably the greatest genocidal campaign ever performed. And let me just end with this idea of forced assimilation. See, once they murder you and they kill you and they beat you to submission, the final stage of extermination is not the extermination of the body, but of course, the erasure and deculturation and the destruction of your mind and soul as a people. Because once you break the spirit of the people, how therefore then you keep those people under domination? But through assimilation policies, like educational policies, that teach you that yes, you come from a people, you come from savages, you come from people who had nothing. And you should be thankful, in fact, that this history was placed upon you. And educational institutions are used in this manner to teach false histories, to teach political myths, to justify, legitimatize the kind of violence, the kind of genocidal policies that are performed on people to take. And so in the end, when we look at today, and I look at, like the struggle that Mickey was talking about earlier up in EL, see, to me, this is still an extension of exactly the same thing. For Hawaiians, the fight over water is really not about water. It's really about our own humanity as a people. For we know without the water, there is no land, there is no life. We as Hawaiians will not survive without our own land and without our own water. We can call ourselves sovereign. What's good at being sovereign if I have a nice ID and I don't got no land and I got no water? Or the land that I got has been polluted with pesticides and insecticides. So really the kinds of struggles that you see going on today is still part of that struggle against this extermination. And I use the word extermination, not as a hyperbolic word. I use extermination of reality. The reality is that the system today, See, they originally had planned that we would have been gone a long time ago. The original idea was through the educational system and so forth, Hawaiians would have been converted a long time ago as proud Americans, and somehow we wouldn't say anything, we would just accept all that has been going on. Unfortunately for them, as we start to learn our language, our history, start to understand our own humanity, start realizing that we need to struggle for our own sense of who we are, we cannot help but politically start to engage, you see. And so when I look at struggles, whether it's Mauna Kea, whether it's the water, whether it was Haleakala, whether it's the GMO issue, and all those issues that Uncle Walter shared, this is to me a fight against ideas like extermination. And physically, and mentally, and culturally, all that has been done to our people, and American Indians, who by the time, in I think in 1930, there were less than 250,000 of them that were counted. From the millions. But the good news, we're still here. The good news, even with all the crap that has been put on our people, all those policies, there's not a place in the world that says commodified as Hawaii, missionized as Hawaii, decultured in many ways, and yet our people still resist. To me, that's such an amazing idea. And as I say, even with all they put on us, the fact that we still resist is amazing. As I always say, if that's the best they got, we already got them licked. So anyway, mahalo. And if you have any ideas or questions, we can talk story. Mahalo.